The European Union is confronting an escalating energy crisis following the cessation of Russian gas transit through Ukraine. This disruption stems from Ukraine's decision not to renew gas transit contracts with the EU, sending shockwaves through the region. Complicating matters, Qatar, a leading supplier of liquefied natural gas, LNG, to Europe, has issued warnings about potentially suspending energy exports to the EU due to the bloc's proposed environmental regulations targeting methane emissions from fossil fuel imports. This multi-layered crisis has exposed the EU's vulnerabilities and tested its cohesion amidst mounting geopolitical pressures. The halt in Russian gas transit has led to immediate energy supply disruptions, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe. Hungary, heavily reliant on Russian gas transported via Ukrainian pipelines, has been hit the hardest. Limited alternative routes and inadequate LNG infrastructure have compounded the region's challenges, forcing some nations to deplete their gas reserves. Consequently, energy prices have soared, with the benchmark Dutch TTF gas futures witnessing a sharp increase, putting immense strain on energy-intensive industries, raising household energy bills, and fueling inflation across the EU. Slovakia, Austria, and Hungary, which are more dependent on Russian gas, face mounting pressure to find urgent solutions. The situation has been further aggravated by severe cold weather sweeping across Europe, which has significantly diminished output from renewable energy sources such as wind and solar power. Weak wind conditions and reduced sunlight have created a shortfall in renewable energy generation, compelling the EU to depend more heavily on conventional energy sources like gas and coal. This reliance has reignited debates over the sustainability and reliability of the EU's energy transition strategy. While renewable energy remains central to the bloc's long-term goals, the current crisis underscores the necessity for a more robust and diversified energy mix to ensure resilience during extreme conditions. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has intensified his criticism of EU sanctions on Russia, linking Hungary's potential veto of sanctions renewal to Ukraine's decision to halt Russian gas transit to Europe. Orbán contends that this stoppage significantly heightens energy supply risks for Hungary and other Central European countries reliant on Russian gas. Since Russia's conflict with Ukraine began in February 2022, the EU has imposed 15 comprehensive sanctions packages targeting key sectors of the Russian economy to undermine its capacity for aggression. These measures include bans on Russian oil imports transported by sea, restrictions on liquefied petroleum gas and certain metal goods from Russia, and a price cap of $60 per barrel on Russian oil exports to limit Moscow's revenue. Additionally, the EU has banned Russian coal imports as part of its broader sanctions strategy. Financial sanctions have also played a pivotal role, with the freezing of Russian central bank assets and the exclusion of key Russian banks from the SWIFT financial messaging system, severely restricting Russia's ability to conduct global financial transactions. These coordinated sanctions reflect the EU's determination to economically pressure Russia while showing solidarity with Ukraine. However, the sanctions require unanimous approval from all 27 member states and must be renewed every 6 months. Hungary has consistently voiced concerns over the economic repercussions of these sanctions, particularly for EU countries heavily reliant on Russian energy. Orbán argues that the sanctions harm European economies more than they affect Russia, calling for their reassessment. Recently, Hungary has threatened to veto the renewal of sanctions unless Ukraine resumes gas transit through its territory. This underscores the intricate interplay between energy dependence and political decisions within the EU. On January 1, 2025, Ukraine allowed its gas transit agreement with Russia to expire, halting the flow of Russian natural gas through Ukrainian pipelines to Europe. This marked the end of a 5-decade-long energy corridor critical to European energy security. Historically, Ukraine's pipeline network played a significant role in Russian gas exports to Europe, accounting for approximately 40 billion cubic meters in 2021. By 2024, this figure had dropped to about 14.65 billion cubic meters, reflecting Europe's efforts to diversify energy sources and reduce reliance on Russian gas. Despite the decrease, this transit remained essential for Central European nations like Hungary, Slovakia, and Austria, which now face significant challenges in securing alternative energy sources. Hungary, for instance, has urged the EU to persuade Ukraine to resume gas transit, citing the economic toll and rising energy prices stemming from the halt. The expiration of the transit agreement has broader implications for European energy security. The EU has been actively seeking alternative gas supplies to mitigate the effects of reduced Russian imports. Efforts include increasing LNG imports from countries like the United States and Qatar and enhancing infrastructure to support diversified energy sources. However, Hungary's dependence on Russian energy remains substantial, with approximately 80% of its natural gas and 65% of its oil sourced from Russia. While much of Hungary's gas is delivered through the Turkstream pipeline, which bypasses Ukraine, the halt in Ukrainian transit has driven up energy prices in the country. Prime Minister Orbán estimates that EU sanctions have cost Hungary €19 billion since 2022, although specifics on this calculation remain unclear. In response to these challenges, Orbán has outlined several conditions for Hungary's continued support of EU sanctions against Russia. First, he demands that Ukraine restore the transit of Russian gas through its territory to stabilize regional energy supplies. Second, he seeks assurances that Ukraine will not take actions that could further impede Russian energy imports to Hungary. Finally, he calls for measures to safeguard existing transit infrastructure from potential military actions or sabotage to ensure uninterrupted energy flow. These demands highlight Hungary's critical dependence on Russian energy and underline the broader challenges the EU faces in maintaining a unified stance on sanctions amidst the diverse interests of its member states. The halt in Ukrainian gas transit has severely disrupted European energy markets, causing gas prices to spike. The Dutch TTF gas futures rose by 20% in January 2025, reaching €75 per megawatt-hour. While this remains below the 2022 peak of €340 per megawatt-hour, the recent increase marks a worrying reversal of the downward trend seen in late 2023. The surge reflects growing fears of supply shortages and intensified competition for limited gas supplies. Energy-intensive industries, including chemicals, metals, and glass production, are bearing the brunt of the crisis. Rising operational costs are eroding profit margins, forcing companies to either pass on costs to consumers or shut down operations altogether. Essential goods production, such as fertilizers and plastics, is under threat, while aluminum and steel smelters face operational challenges, with some reducing production or announcing temporary closures. Construction material and specialty glass manufacturers are grappling with stiff competition from lower-cost regions, raising concerns about plant closures and job losses. The rise in energy prices has also exacerbated inflation across the EU, with economists predicting an additional 0.5% to 0.7% increase in consumer price inflation in 2025. This intensifies the cost of living crisis, particularly as food prices are affected by higher agricultural production, transportation, and packaging costs. Elevated inflation may prompt tighter monetary policies from the European Central Bank, potentially dampening economic growth further. Central European countries, more reliant on Russian gas, face acute challenges as the energy crisis unfolds. Alternative energy routes, such as the Turkstream and Nord Stream pipelines, have faced challenges in compensating for the lost transit volumes of gas through Ukraine. Approximately 40% to 50% of annual gas imports for countries like Slovakia and Austria depend on Ukrainian pipelines, and the halt in transit has compelled both nations to expedite LNG import projects and improve pipeline interconnections with neighboring countries. Despite these efforts, the shortfall is unlikely to be fully addressed in the short term. While Germany has significantly reduced its reliance on Russian gas since 2022, its industrial base remains vulnerable to price fluctuations. Key sectors, such as automotive manufacturing and machinery production, are already experiencing the strain of escalating energy costs. Similarly, Italy, as a major European gas consumer, is grappling with rising expenses in its energy-intensive industries, particularly in ceramics and textiles. The country's increased dependence on LNG imports has left it exposed to volatile global market conditions. The disruptions in gas transit are rippling through supply chains across Europe, with smaller economies in Eastern Europe, which lack robust diversification strategies, being particularly at risk. This uneven economic impact within the EU poses challenges for unified policy responses. Europe's ability to secure adequate LNG supplies in 2025 hinges on favorable global market conditions, but rising demand from Asia, especially China, presents a significant risk to procurement. While the EU is working to expand capacity along existing routes such as the Southern Gas Corridor and interconnections with North African suppliers, infrastructure limitations and geopolitical risks threaten to undermine these efforts. Without sufficient transit volumes, the EU may have to rely heavily on reserves to meet demand, particularly during harsh winters. Analysts warn that this could deplete storage levels dangerously low ahead of the winter of 2025 to 2026, increasing the risk of energy shortages if LNG imports are disrupted by geopolitical tensions or infrastructure failures. Such disruptions could lead to an energy crisis akin to 2022, albeit under different circumstances. In January 2025, United States. President Donald Trump reiterated his stance on trade with the European Union, emphasizing the need for the bloc to significantly increase its imports of American oil and gas. He warned that failure to comply would result in substantial tariffs on European goods. In a video address to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Trump criticized the EU's trade practices and regulatory frameworks, particularly those affecting United States technology companies. He stated that the EU must reduce its trade deficit with the United States through large-scale purchases of American oil and gas, adding, "Otherwise, it's tariffs all the way." Trump also urged the EU to lower regulatory burdens and increase defense spending, proposing that member states contribute 5% of their GDP to NATO. Furthermore, he called for aggressive deregulation within the EU to stimulate economic growth and highlighted Saudi Arabia's role in reducing oil prices to help end the conflict in Ukraine. In response, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen expressed concern about the potential fragmentation of the global economy due to Trump's tariff threats. She emphasized the importance of maintaining strong economic ties and cautioned against engaging in a race to the bottom in global trade. The EU has signaled its willingness to engage in discussions with the United States to strengthen the transatlantic relationship, including cooperation in the energy sector. A European Commission spokesperson stated, "We are ready to discuss with President Trump how we can further enhance our already strong relationship, including in the energy sector." However, several challenges complicate this potential shift in energy trade dynamics. First, the EU is already a major importer of the United States LNG, with American supplies constituting a significant share of Europe's gas imports. Further increases may be constrained by existing infrastructure capacities and long-term contracts with other suppliers. Second, the EU's stringent environmental regulations, including upcoming rules targeting methane emissions from fossil fuel imports, could pose compliance challenges for United States exporters, especially if the United States rolls back environmental protections under the new administration. Third, Trump's tariff threats have raised fears of a potential trade war between the United States and the EU. European leaders are wary of setting a precedent by yielding to such demands, which could encourage further economic coercion. The EU is already grappling with a severe energy crisis as Ukraine halts Russian gas transit, disrupting supplies and driving up prices across the region. Further complicating matters, Qatar has warned of reduced LNG exports due to EU regulations, while cold weather has constrained renewable energy output. Hungary has added pressure on the EU to reconsider sanctions on Russia unless gas transit resumes, revealing divisions within the bloc. To add to the uncertainty, President Trump's ambiguous stance on Russia and the Ukraine war muddies the geopolitical landscape. His calls for increased EU imports of American LNG stand in stark contrast to his unclear position on Russia, leaving EU leaders uncertain about the United States support. This crisis underscores the EU's reliance on external energy sources and highlights the fragility of its energy transition strategy. To navigate this turbulent period, the EU must strengthen infrastructure, diversify energy supplies, and balance its climate goals with energy security.